She was 2 steps from the bin when she heard it. Not the rain. Not the thunder cracking open the sky above Busan. Something underneath all of that, faint, broken, barely there, like a sound that had already been fighting for a long time and was running out of fight. Zara dropped the trash bags. She ran. She threw back the lid. And what she found stopped her heart completely, then restarted it in a rhythm it had never known before. A newborn baby girl. Soaked cloth. Skin turning the wrong color. Mouth open, the cry already fading. Already fading fast. Zara pressed that tiny body to her chest, tilted her head back, covered her mouth and nose and breathed. 1 breath. 2. 2 fingers to the sternum. Count. Press. Count. Always out loud. It keeps the rhythm and keeps the mind from breaking. The rain screamed. Zara's tears fell onto the baby's face. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly lost count twice. She found it again both times through sheer refusal. Please, not this one. Not this baby. The baby coughed. Then she screamed, loud, furious, completely and magnificently alive. And Zara collapsed forward, sobbing, shaking, unable to stop. What Zara did not know yet, across that city, in a building with no signage on any map, a very dangerous man had been searching for this exact baby for 3 weeks. His name was Ethan Cole, and the woman who had put this child in that bin, the woman who had walked through the rain and driven away, was the one person Ethan Cole had trusted with everything his entire life. His mother. What happens when a Nigerian waitress in a foreign country, no papers, no backup, nobody in her corner, ends up holding the most dangerous secret in Busan? Stay till the end for the moment Ethan Cole walks up those stairs, looks at Zara, and she does not step back, does not drop her eyes, looks directly at the most dangerous man in the room and says, the woman who found her daughter in the trash bin. The woman who brought her back to life. Welcome to Soulmate Stories, family. This is Black Waitress who found a newborn baby crying in the trash. Comment not this one if Zara's prayer in that alley just shattered you. Comment counting if you held your breath through every compression. Comment the mother if you need a moment when you find out who put that baby in the bin. Like if your chest is doing something it has no permission to be doing right now. Subscribe because part 2 is Serena finding out her daughter is alive. And that scene will not let you breathe. Let's go. She was 2 steps from the bin when she heard it. Not the rain. Not the thunder cracking open the sky above Busan. Not the wind throwing itself against the walls of the alley, like something trying to get inside. Something else. Something underneath all of that, faint and broken and barely there, like a sound that had already been fighting for a long time and was running out of fight. Zara stopped walking. The trash bags in her hands dripped with rain. She stood completely still in the middle of that dark, drowning alley, and she listened. And there it was again. She dropped the bags. She ran toward the sound, the bin at the far end of the alley. She threw the lid back with both hands and the rain poured in, and she saw it, and her heart stopped completely, and then restarted in a rhythm it had never known before. A baby girl, newborn, wrapped in a soaked cloth, skin the color of something that should have been warm and wasn't. Mouth open, the cry that had pulled Zara across that alley already fading fast. She grabbed her. She pressed that tiny body against her chest, and she tilted the baby's head back, and she covered that tiny nose and mouth with her lips, and she breathed. 1 breath. 2. She pressed 2 fingers to the baby's sternum. Counted. Pressed. Counted. She counted out loud the way her first aid instructor had taught her. Always out loud. It keeps the rhythm and keeps the mind from breaking. The rain screamed against every surface in that alley. Zara's tears fell onto the baby's face. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly lost count twice and found it again both times through sheer refusal. Please, she said between counts. Please. Not this one. Not this baby. The baby girl coughed. Then she screamed. Loud, furious, completely and magnificently, and impossibly alive. Her color shifting in Zara's hands, the terrible blue retreating, pink flooding in like sunrise after the longest night. Her fists clenched, her legs kicked with the full, indignant energy of someone who is somewhere important to be, and has been unreasonably delayed. Zara collapsed forward over the baby, sobbing, shaking, unable to stop. "Thank you," she kept saying into the rain. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The baby screamed, and the sound of her, loud and alive and completely unaware of how close the silence had come, was the most beautiful thing Zara had ever heard in her entire life. She did not know yet whose baby this was. She did not know yet that somewhere across the city, in a building with no signage and no reason to appear on any official map, a very dangerous man had been searching for 3 weeks, quietly and methodically, the way only the most dangerous kind of men search. Like a man who has already decided what happens when he finds what he is looking for. She did not know that the answer to everything was screaming in her arms. She only knew one thing. She was not letting go. Before we go any further, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell. Because where this story is going, nobody standing in that alley saw it coming. And neither will you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because I genuinely want to know. And now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why Zara was in that alley on that night in a foreign country in a monsoon holding a baby the world had thrown away, you need to understand who she was before Korea tried to break her. Zara Mensah was from Lagos, Nigeria. Second of 4 children born to a retired secondary school teacher who believed that education was the closest human beings had ever come to touching something sacred, and a market trader mother who believed that the sacred specifically helped the people who woke up before 4 in the morning and got to work. Zara had grown up between those two philosophies and quietly become both of them. Sharp enough to study anything. Stubborn enough to survive everything. Her obsession with South Korea started at 15, and it was the kind of obsession that other people found strange, and she found entirely logical. While her friends covered their walls with images of American cities, Zara was teaching herself Hangul in the margins of her school notebooks. She watched Korean films, practiced vocabulary at the dinner table until her father started calling her his little Korean, half joke, entirely proud. She was not chasing a trend. She was chasing something specific. The feeling that there was a version of her life waiting in a country she had never touched, a language she had not yet mastered, a world that did not yet know her name. She intended to go find it. At 23, the dream became a plane ticket. A partial scholarship to Busan National University. Korean language and cultural studies. Her father quietly sold a portion of their land before her mother could argue it back. Her mother fasted for 3 days before the flight. Her younger siblings made handwritten signs at the airport that said "Come back rich and famous" in large, spectacular, terrible letters, and Zara laughed so hard she nearly missed her boarding call. She did not miss it. She boarded that plane with everything she owned in 2 bags and a heart so full of wanting that there was barely room for fear. South Korea hit her like a wall of cold and wonder simultaneously. Busan was nothing like she had imagined, and exactly like she had imagined at the same time. The cold arrived first and settled into her Nigerian bones like a personal argument she had not prepared for. But the city itself, mountains dropping straight into the sea, port lights burning their reflection into the water at night, steam rising from street food carts on every corner like the city itself was breathing, it was real in a way that dreams rarely survive becoming. She studied hard. She made 2 friends. A Korean girl named Jeon, who found Zara's Busan dialect attempts absolutely hilarious, and an Ethiopian student named Messi, who became her emergency contact, her co-conspirator, and the person she called when everything felt too far from home. For 1 year, life was almost exactly what she had crossed an ocean for. Then the letter came. 2 paragraphs long. That was the thing that stayed with Zara longest afterward. Not the news itself, but the indifference of its length. 2 paragraphs to dismantle everything. The scholarship organization had lost its government funding. All support discontinued, effective immediately. A reference number at the top. A signature at the bottom from someone whose name she read once and never looked at again. She sat on the edge of her bed in her campus room and read it twice. Then she folded it. She put it in the drawer. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Busan skyline for a long time without moving. She did not cry. She had learned very early from watching her mother stand in hospital corridors and market stalls, and every hard place life had ever put her that crying was something you did after. After you had thought. After you had planned. After you had looked the problem directly in its face and taken its full measure. Tears before that were a luxury, and Zara had never been able to afford luxury. So she stood at the window and she thought. 90 days. That was how long her student visa had before it collapsed without enrollment to hold it up. 90 days to find another institution, another funding source, another door into the future she had come here to build. She made a list that same night. Every option, every contact, every professor who had praised her work. She wrote it in the small notebook she kept beside her bed, the same one where she had once practiced Hangul in the margins. The doors did not open. She appealed the scholarship termination. Denied. Emergency enrollment deferment. No framework existed for it. 3 international student support organizations. 2 didn't respond. 1 responded to say they couldn't assist students whose primary funding had already lapsed. And while the doors were closing in Busan, the phone calls from home were getting heavier. Her mother had been unwell for months. Small things at first. Fatigue. A cough that would not leave. Weight dropping week by week in the quiet way that Nigerian mothers describe as nothing serious. Focus on your studies, because they have spent their whole lives making their pain smaller so their children's dreams can stay large. But the hospital visits had started. And then the bills. Her younger brother called one Tuesday evening with the careful voice of someone delivering news they have been rehearsing. The diagnosis was serious. The treatment was possible. The cost was not small. Zara listened to her brother's voice on the phone and looked at the wall of her room, and she calculated. She was the only one abroad, the only one theoretically positioned to earn in a currency that could cover what was needed. Her father had already sold land. There was nothing left to sell. Going home was not an option. Not in the way people say things aren't options when they simply don't want to choose them. Going home meant her mother's treatment stopped. Going home meant her brother's school fees vanished. Going home meant everything her father had quietly sacrificed collapsed into nothing. She was not going home. She was going to find a door. It was a Thursday afternoon, raining the way Busan rained in that season. Like the sky had a personal grievance when she found herself standing on a quiet street in the older part of Siamayan district in front of a restaurant she had passed twice before without stopping. First Snow Restaurant. Dark polished wood panels. Paper lanterns hanging gold and still beneath the awning. The smell coming through the door was extraordinary. Slow-simmered broth and toasted sesame and something deep and warm that made something in Zara's chest ache with a homesickness she couldn't entirely explain because it wasn't even her home. It was just the idea of home. The smell of a place where someone was being taken care of. Beside the door, a small handwritten notice. Staff needed. Inquire inside. Zara stood in the rain and had a rapid, honest conversation with herself. No legal work papers. Complicated visa situation. No Korean restaurant experience. A foreign student from Nigeria standing soaking wet on a street that had no particular reason to welcome her. Every sensible thought told her to walk away. Then the door opened. The woman standing in it looked at her with eyes that had clearly been reading people for a very long time and had already reached a preliminary conclusion. Small woman. Silver hair pinned with exact deliberate precision. Dressed simply, but with the kind of careful neatness that signals a person who has decided exactly how the world will see them and is not open to negotiation on the matter. Her posture was the posture of someone who owned every room she walked into, not aggressively but completely, the way certain people carry authority so naturally it stops feeling like authority and starts feeling like weather. She looked at Zara standing in the rain with her spine straight and her face composed and her clothes dripping. "You look like you need hot soup and a job," she said. Slow, clear Korean. Her voice was warm, genuinely warm. But underneath the warmth, something else. Something watchful. The eyes of a woman who was assessing, not just welcoming. Eyes for whom kindness and calculation were not opposites but partners. Zara noticed it. A flicker of something she couldn't name. A small quiet instinct that lived just below the surface of conscious thought. The kind of instinct that gets dismissed when you need the job and the soup and the room and everything else this woman might be able to offer. She dismissed it. "I need both," she said in Korean. One elegant eyebrow rose. "You speak well enough to work hard and not cause trouble." A pause. A study. The full, still attention of a woman taking complete inventory of another person. Not just what they showed, but what they were trying not to show. Then Madame Cho stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in. Soup first. Then we talk." Zara walked through the door, and the warmth of the restaurant wrapped around her. The smell, the light, the heat. And for one moment, standing in the entrance of a place she knew nothing about, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked tight since the morning she read that 2-paragraph letter. She should have paid more attention to the instinct. She didn't. She was cold, and she needed the job. 8 months passed. Here is what those 8 months looked like from Zara's side. 4:30 in the morning, up before the city, prepping broth that had to simmer for hours before the first customer arrived. Hands red from cold water and washing. Floors swept. Tables wiped. Korean pouring out of her faster every week. Not textbook Korean anymore, but real Busan Korean. The kind with edges and rhythm and humor that you only learn by living inside it. Madame Cho correcting her pronunciation with a sharp tap on the counter, and then when Zara got it right, a small nod that felt like the highest praise available. Money going home every month. Not much. Enough. Her mother's treatment continuing. Her brother's school fees covered. The weight on Zara's chest not gone but manageable. The weight of someone carrying something heavy who has found the right way to hold it. She made the regulars laugh. She learned which customers wanted to be left alone and which ones wanted someone to talk to. She negotiated at the market with suppliers because Madame Cho had started sending her alone, and she negotiated well because stubbornness, it turned out, was a universal commercial language. Late nights. Men arriving after midnight in quiet, expensive cars. Disappearing into the back dining room. Leaving before dawn. Zara noticed. She filed it away in the part of her mind reserved for things that were not her concern. She had agreed to that condition. She kept it. She had no idea what the walls of that restaurant were built on. But while Zara was building something small and dignified and real above a restaurant kitchen, somewhere across Busan another woman was quietly and slowly being taken apart. Serena Cole was 28 years old, and she was so lonely that some mornings she stood in the kitchen of her enormous immaculate house and listened to the silence and felt it pressing against her eardrums like something physical. She had been beautiful her whole life and had learned early that beauty was not protection. It was not power. It was not love. It was simply a thing that people commented on while deciding more important things about you. Things you were rarely consulted about. Her marriage to Ethan Cole had been arranged in the way that certain arrangements are made in certain worlds, both sides running the calculations and finding the numbers acceptable. Nobody had asked Serena what she wanted. But then nobody in her world had ever made a habit of asking that particular question. She had told herself she could manage it. She had watched her mother manage a similar arrangement for 30 years with grace and endurance, and a particular kind of quiet courage that Serena had grown up admiring and had only recently begun to understand the true cost of. But her mother's arrangement had at least involved a man who came home. Ethan was always elsewhere. Not cruel. He did not insult her, did not raise his voice, did not make her feel small in any of the obvious ways. He simply did not see her. She existed in his house the way furniture existed. Present, functional, occasionally noticed when something was out of place. He looked through her at dinner. He answered her questions with the minimum number of words required. He moved through their shared spaces like a man who had forgotten she was there and had decided not to inconvenience himself by remembering. Loneliness inside a beautiful house, inside a powerful marriage, is a particular kind of slow damage. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates the way water accumulates in a place with no drainage. Quietly, steadily, until one day you realize you are standing in it up to your knees and cannot remember when it started. Serena was standing in it. And then came the evening that made everything worse. Ethan had come home earlier than usual, which should have felt like something. But Serena had learned not to build anything on the foundation of his unexpected appearances. He sat across from her at dinner, already different, already somewhere else behind his eyes, carrying something that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her simultaneously. She noticed immediately. She had become an expert in the geography of his silences. She set down her chopsticks. "Something happened," she said. He looked at her. Really looked. Which was itself unusual enough to tighten her chest. "I was told something today," he said. "About you." The temperature in the room dropped. "What were you told?" "That you were seen meeting privately with a man connected to a rival organization." He said it the way he said everything, quietly, without drama, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "Twice. In the past month." Serena felt the blood leave her face. "That is not what happened," she said. "Tell me what happened." "I met my cousin for lunch at the Grand Hotel." "You have met him. You know who he is." "In the lobby. We crossed paths briefly with a man my cousin knew. We spoke for perhaps 5 minutes. I did not know who he was. I did not arrange to meet him. It was a coincidence in a hotel lobby." "Twice," he said. "I was at that hotel twice in 2 weeks because my cousin was staying there. The second time I did not even see that man." Silence. "Ethan." Her voice was very controlled. "You know me. Whatever you were told, you know me." He looked at her for a long time. And in his eyes, not anger. Anger she could have worked with. What was in his eyes was something colder and more permanent. The expression of a man rearranging his understanding of something he thought he had already correctly understood. "I want to believe you," he said. "Then believe me. It is not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Just slightly. A hairline fracture in the composure she had been maintaining. "I have done nothing. I have never done anything. I am your wife and I have done nothing. If you ever carry a child in this house," he said quietly, and the quietness of it was what silenced her completely, "I will need to be certain it is mine." The words landed like something physical. Serena sat completely still. Ethan stood, straightened his jacket with the calm efficiency of a man concluding a meeting, and left the room. The door did not slam. It closed softly. Somehow that was worse. She did not know yet that those words had not been accidental. She did not know yet that the information Ethan had received, the carefully packaged, deliberately delivered accusation, had been fed to him by someone who understood exactly what those words would make him say. She did not know yet that the coldness now settling into her marriage like concrete had been engineered. She only knew that the man she had married had just told her in the most civilized possible way that he did not fully trust her. And that somewhere in the architecture of everything that followed that moment was the foundation. The cracked, poisoned, deliberately broken foundation that everything else would be built on. She found out on a Wednesday morning in March. The test was from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away. She had paid cash. She had walked home the long way. The paper bag folded small inside her coat pocket like something contraband. She took it in the bathroom with the door locked and the tap running. And then she sat on the cold tile floor and she looked at it. 2 lines. She sat there for a very long time without moving. The tap kept running. Steam from the hot water slowly filled the small room, and the mirror above the sink disappeared into white fog. And still she sat there with the test in both hands. She was not confused about whose child it was. There had been one night, unexpected, almost accidental, the one night in recent memory when something almost human had moved between her and Ethan before the distance reassembled itself. She knew exactly. There was no question. But the words were already in her head. His words from that dinner table, spoken quietly, placed down like stones. "I will need to be certain it is mine." She closed her eyes. She wrapped the test in tissue. She buried it at the bottom of the bathroom bin. She stood up, turned off the tap, looked at her own reflection appearing slowly as the fog cleared from the mirror, and she made a decision in that silence that she understood was dangerous and lonely and completely necessary. Nobody would know. Not yet. For 7 months, Serena hid it with the systematic, exhausting precision of a woman whose survival had always required concealment. Loose clothing chosen carefully. Not dramatically loose. Just enough. The housekeeper dismissed on a pretext. Prenatal vitamins ordered anonymously. Every meal calculated. Every outing managed. Every interaction with Ethan, which were few and brief, navigated with the attention of someone walking across ice. She told no one. She was alone with it in a way that had its own specific weight. Not just the loneliness of the pregnancy, but the loneliness of carrying a secret that was also a life. A life that kicked and turned and hiccuped inside her in the dark and that she could not speak about to a single person on earth. She talked to the baby in whispers sometimes at night when the house was completely silent and Ethan was away and she was certain no sound would carry anywhere. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and she whispered. She almost made it. Margaret Cole arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning. A habit the entire household had simply absorbed as a condition of existing in Ethan Cole's orbit. She had her own key. She used it without apology. Serena was in the upstairs bathroom, 7 months along, bent over the sink with the gracelessness of a heavily pregnant woman whose body was filing formal complaints. The loose dress she was wearing had shifted. There was no explaining the shape of her from the doorway. She heard a sound and turned. Margaret Cole stood in the bathroom doorway. Ethan's mother. A woman who had spent 30 years building her son into something untouchable and had removed, systematically and deliberately, every soft place in him that might have made him something less. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across Margaret's face that was not calculation. Something older and more instinctive than calculation. Her eyes moved to Serena's stomach, and something in them softened. Genuinely softened. The way eyes soften when they see new life and the body responds before the mind can intervene. Her hand came up slightly, almost involuntarily. Then she stopped. The softness did not disappear. It was rerouted, pressed down beneath something harder and more practiced. The machine behind those eyes switched back on. "How far along?" she asked. 7 months, Serena whispered. Margaret said nothing else. She went downstairs and made tea. She sat across from Serena at the kitchen table, and she was quiet for a very long time. The tea cooled between them. And behind Margaret Cole's gracious, careful eyes, the machine was running, calculating, measuring risk and exposure and the particular vulnerability that a child, especially one whose parentage Ethan had publicly poisoned with doubt, represented in a world built entirely on the absence of soft places. A child was leverage. A child was a target. A child was a crack in an empire that could not afford cracks. She made her decision at that kitchen table, in the silence over cooling tea. She told Serena she would handle everything. Serena, alone for 7 months with a secret she had carried in silence and terror, looked at this woman's composed, certain face and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember that she was not entirely alone. She trusted her. That was the most devastating mistake of her life. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night in November. It came fast the way Busan storms came in that season. Without apology, the sky simply opening itself and pouring everything it had onto the city below. By 10 o'clock, the streets were empty, and the rain was the loudest thing in the world. Serena had been in labor since 7. The pain arrived the way serious pain always arrives, not gradually, not with warning, but as a sudden rearrangement of reality in which everything that existed before it becomes theoretical. She gripped the headboard and she breathed the way she had read to breathe, and it helped approximately nothing. Margaret arrived within 20 minutes, not with an ambulance, with a doctor. A small, quiet man with careful hands and eyes that had seen enough to be permanently unsurprised by anything. He set his bag down and got to work with the efficient calm of someone for whom this was simply another task on a long list. No hospital. No nurses. No one who knew her. Just this room, this storm, this pain. The labor went on for hours. Hours in which Serena existed in a place beyond ordinary sensation, a raw, tearing, animal place where the body takes over completely and the mind becomes simply a passenger. She called for her mother once, not deliberately, not consciously, just a sound from somewhere below thought. The oldest, most instinctive cry a human being can make. Her mother was cities away and knew nothing. Margaret held her hand and made her voice soft and said all the right things in all the right tones. At 11:47 at night, the baby came. A girl.
Small. Pink.
Absolutely furiously alive. She cried immediately. A full, clear, powerful cry that cut straight through the sound of the storm and filled the room. Serena heard it, and something in her that had been clenched tight for 7 months released all at once. She reached out with shaking arms. "Let me hold her."
Please.
"You need to rest," Margaret said, stepping forward. "I want to hold my baby."
Please let me.
"You lost blood. Rest first." Margaret looked down at the baby, and there it was again. That flicker. That involuntary, unguarded, terribly human flicker of something that lived beneath every calculation she had ever made. The baby's eyes were closed. Her tiny fists were clenched beside her face. She was so new that the world had not yet had a single second to mark her. Margaret looked at her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which something behind her eyes wavered. Then she looked at the doctor. He looked back at her. He understood. He had been paid to understand for many years without being asked to speak. She nodded once. The doctor administered something to Serena for the blood loss, he said, for the exhaustion, completely routine rest now. Within minutes, Serena's eyes closed. Her reaching arms went still. Margaret wrapped the baby in a kitchen cloth. She walked downstairs. She walked through the back of the house and out into the rain without stopping, without looking back, without allowing herself another 3 seconds of wavering. She got in the car. She drove. She stopped at an alley 2 kilometers away. She walked to the bin at the far end. She stood in the rain for a moment. Then she put the baby inside and walked back to her car and drove away. She told Ethan that night that Serena had delivered and there had been complications, that the baby had not survived. Her voice was smooth and final. The voice that closed things. "Everything has been handled." Ethan said nothing for a long moment. He looked at his mother's face, searching for something.
Grief.
Disturbance. Anything human. Her face gave him nothing. He did not know yet what everything she had taken from him. He would. Zara was tying the last trash bag of the night. She had stayed late because a storm had knocked a display shelf and she refused to leave a mess for the morning. She had no idea what was coming toward her through the rain. She was 2 steps from the bin when she heard it. And you already know what happened next. You felt it at the beginning of the story, in that alley, in the rain, in the dark. You felt Zara's hands shaking and her tears falling onto that baby's face and the counting, always the counting, because the rhythm was the only thing keeping both of them from the silence. You already know she did not let go. She carried her upstairs wrapped in her own sweater, pressed against her heartbeat. Later that night, in the small quiet of her room with the storm softening outside and the baby fed and drowsy and warm against her chest, Zara pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and whispered into the dark.
"I see you," she said.
"Whatever brought you here, whatever they thought you were, I see you." And she named her, quietly, in the language her grandmother had spoken on the same kind of rain-heavy nights. A name that meant goodness. A name that meant I know what worth looks like. A name that said, you are not what they decided you were. 3 weeks. That was how long Zara secretly raised a newborn baby girl above a restaurant in Busan, South Korea. Completely alone. No instruction manual. No support system. And absolutely no sleep. The first night was the most terrifying thing she had ever survived. And she had survived a visa collapse, a family medical crisis, and 8 months of building a life from scratch in a foreign country. None of that had prepared her for a newborn who needed feeding every 2 hours without negotiation, who did not care that it was 3 in the morning, who did not care that Zara had a 6 o'clock prep shift, who was hungry and new to the world, and had strong opinions about both of those things and communicated them at full volume, with complete conviction. Zara learned to hear the difference between the hunger cry and the discomfort cry and the I simply want to be held cry within 4 days. Not because anyone told her how, but because the baby taught her through sheer repetition. She flew upstairs on every break during her restaurant shift. 5 minutes.
Feed. Check.
Hold.
Breathe.
Back downstairs before anyone noticed the gap. She bought everything the baby needed in small quantities from different shops across 3 different neighborhoods. Formula from one place, diapers from another. A small soft blanket from a market stall so far from the restaurant that the vendor would not remember her face.
She was systematic about it.
Covering tracks she wasn't even sure needed covering. But something in her understood instinctively that what she was holding was not just a baby.
It was a secret.
And secrets this size had weight. She fell in love the way you fall into deep water when you didn't plan to swim. Completely.
Suddenly.
Without the possibility of going back to the shore and pretending it hadn't happened. Not the soft, gradual love she had imagined motherhood might feel like someday in some distant theoretical future. Immediate. Total. The kind of love that has been waiting inside you, looking for the right person to attach itself to. And the baby, for her part, found Zara's heartbeat to be the most satisfactory place in the world and communicated this by going completely still the moment she was held against Zara's chest. A fact that destroyed Zara freshly every single time it happened. Without exception. She was going to figure out how to protect her. She was going to find a way, the way she always found a way.
She just needed a little more time.
She did not get it. It was a quiet Saturday evening. The restaurant had served its last table. The other staff were pulling on coats, saying good nights, clattering out the front door into the cold. Zara was wiping down the last tables. She heard footsteps on the back stairs.
Slow.
Deliberate. The footsteps of someone who owned every surface they walked on. She moved fast. Not fast enough. Madame Cho stood at the top of the back stairs with one hand resting on the wall and her eyes fixed on the door to Zara's room. Zara looked at her face and stopped breathing. Because that face, the face she had watched for 8 months, maintained perfect, unreadable composure through every situation, every late-night visitor, every pressure the restaurant had absorbed, that face was doing something she had never seen it do. It was cracking. Not dramatically. Not visibly to anyone who hadn't studied it as carefully as Zara had. But the composure was fractured, just slightly, just enough. And what was showing through the fracture was an expression Zara could not immediately name. Something between recognition and horror. The expression of a person who has just turned a corner and walked directly into something they buried and believed was gone.
Whose child is that? She asked.
Very quietly. Zara went completely still.
I found her, she said.
The silence that followed had physical weight. Where? One word. Very careful. The carefulness of someone who already knew the answer and needed to hear it spoken out loud anyway. In the bin behind the restaurant. 3 weeks ago. The night of the storm. Madame Cho said nothing. Her hand tightened against the wall. From inside Zara's room, the baby made a small sound. Not a cry. Just a murmur. The soft, contented sound of a sleeping baby who trusts completely and absolutely that the world is safe and warm and that the person who holds her will always come back. You should have reported it, Cho said. I was going to. I am still working out. You should have reported it immediately. I know, but she was dying. And Zara stopped. She looked at Madame Cho's face and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the November air. Something that rearranged, in one quiet second, 8 months of carefully constructed trust. Madame Cho. Zara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Do you know whose baby this is? Silence. 5 full seconds of silence, in which the only sound was the baby breathing softly behind a locked door. Madame Cho said nothing. And her silence was the loudest answer Zara had ever received in her life. She did not know yet that 3 blocks from the restaurant, in a building with no signage and blacked-out windows, a man was already looking at a surveillance photograph of a young woman carrying a baby out of a convenience store. He set it down. He picked up his phone. The front door of the restaurant opened downstairs. Footsteps on the restaurant floor.
Slow.
Deliberate. Confident. The footsteps of a man who had never once in his life entered a room uncertain of his right to be in it. A man's voice, deep and quiet in the particular way of voices that have never needed volume, because every room they enter simply adjusts. The light is still on. I saw the car. The footsteps were moving toward the back stairs. Zara looked at Madame Cho, and in the older woman's eyes, for one unguarded, uncontrolled second, was pure naked fear. Not fear of the man coming up the stairs. Fear of what was about to happen when he arrived at the top of them. Ethan Cole appeared at the base of the stairs and looked up. He saw his mother's fractured composure. He saw the young woman standing in the hallway with her spine straight and her jaw set and something in her blue eyes that was not fear. He had survived 34 years in the most dangerous world in this city by reading rooms and faces and silences in under 2 seconds. He read this one instantly. He came up the stairs. And Zara needed you to understand something about Ethan Cole in this moment, because he deserves to be introduced properly even here, even now, even in the worst version of what he was about to discover. He was 32 years old, white American, and he was the kind of handsome that made the word feel insufficient. Over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders with the build of someone whose strength had been built by a life that required it. A face that was sharp and precise and clean-jawed in a way that made people look twice before they understood why. Pale gray-green eyes that were clear and direct and carried in them, even now, even in this moment of something building toward catastrophic, the particular quality of complete attention. He was, even here, even arriving at the top of a staircase towards something that was going to rearrange his entire understanding of the last 3 weeks, extraordinarily handsome in the specific way of a man who had absolutely no awareness of it. He stopped in front of Zara. She did not step back, did not drop her eyes, did not perform any of the deference that everyone in proximity to this man eventually performed. She looked directly at him. "Who are you?" he asked. "The woman who works in your mother's restaurant," she said. "The woman who found her daughter in the trash bin behind it 3 weeks ago. The woman who brought her back to life." Not a tremor in her voice. Not a single one. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the door. "Open it," he said. Zara opened the door to her room and stepped aside. Ethan Cole walked in. He stood in the doorway and he looked at the small room. The photographs of Legos pinned carefully to the wall. The formula station assembled with precise practicality on the dresser. The nest of sweaters and pillows on the narrow bed constructed with the focused love of someone making the best possible version of something from whatever was available. And in the center of it, sleeping, small and perfect and completely unaware of the earthquake gathering in the doorway around her. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. And what happened to his face in those seconds was not dramatic, was not loud, was not any of the things that grief usually performs. It was the opposite. It was a man built entirely for stone trying to absorb something that stone was not designed to hold. The set of his jaw shifted. The line of his shoulders changed by a degree that was almost invisible and meant everything. His hands dropped open at his sides. He looked at his daughter. He looked at her for so long that the silence became its own kind of sound. Then he turned to his mother.
"Tell me," he said.
Not a request. Not a question. The 2 words of a man who has understood that something enormous has been kept from him and has decided that the next minutes will contain all of it. Margaret Cole straightened, and she told him. But not the way a person confesses when they believe they were wrong. She told him the way a person confesses when they believe they were right and are simply facing the consequence of a decision the other person is too close to evaluate fairly. You had already said it yourself. If a child came into this house, you would need to be certain. You said those words. I heard them. The pregnancy was hidden from everyone, including you. 7 months. A wife who conceals a pregnancy for 7 months. What does that tell you? What would your enemies have done with that? What would they have done the moment they heard there was a child in your house whose parentage you had publicly questioned? Tell me what you did, Ethan said. Quiet. I arranged everything privately. The delivery at the house. I was protecting. You threw my daughter in a trash bin, he said. Each word placed down like a stone on a table. I made a decision under pressure that I believed. You threw my daughter in a trash bin. Quieter this time. Lower. Slower. With the weight of something that had passed beyond anger into a place that had no name, but that everyone in the room felt in their chest. Silence. Then Zara's baby reached out from her nest of sweaters, eyes still closed, still sleeping, and her tiny hand found Zara's finger and closed around it with the focused, absolute grip of someone who has made a permanent decision. Ethan looked at her.
She is mine, he said.
Look at her face and tell me she is not mine. Nobody spoke. He turned to Zara fully. The complete unhurried attention of a man who had spent his entire life deciding quickly what mattered and what didn't, and had just placed her in the category that mattered.
You saved her, he said.
Yes. Alone. In the rain. On a night when you could have walked past and no one would have known. I would have known, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Your visa situation, he said. You said it was complicated. My entire life in this country is currently complicated, she said. In case you need the full picture.
The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Just barely.
The ghost of something that in another life, under other circumstances, might have been the beginning of a smile. He reached for his phone. He made 2 calls.
Brief. Precise.
The kind of calls where the person on the other end does not ask questions because the voice making the request does not leave space for them. When he hung up, he looked at Zara. It is no longer complicated, he said. You have my word. In the world Ethan Cole operated in, his word was the most valuable and most dangerous currency available. Zara did not fully know that yet, but she understood from the way the air in the room changed when he said it that it was not nothing. She nodded once. He looked at his daughter one more time. Then he left. 3 hours later, Ethan sat at the edge of the bed in his house beside his wife in the dark. Serena was awake.
She was always awake now.
Had not slept properly in 3 weeks. Lying in the dark, replaying the sound she had heard in that last corridor before the sedative pulled her under. The sound that she had been told was imagination. The sound that had the specific, unmistakable, absolutely real frequency of a newborn's first cry. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, and he told her all of it. From the pregnancy he had not known about to the storm to the woman in the restaurant to the small room with the photographs from Lagos on the wall to the baby sleeping in a nest of sweaters with a name that meant goodness. Serena did not move through any of it. She lay completely still with her eyes open in the dark, and she listened, and she did not make a sound. And for a moment Ethan thought, hoped, that perhaps she was going to hold together. She didn't. It started with her hands. They came up to cover her face slowly. And then the sound came. Quiet.
Wrecked.
The sound of a woman who had been strong for so long and in so many impossible directions that the strength had simply run out all at once. Like a structure that holds and holds and holds and then does not hold anymore. She wept for the 7 months of hiding. For the labor she had survived without a single person who loved her. For the cry she had heard and been told she imagined. For 3 weeks of believing her daughter was dead while her daughter was alive 2 kilometers away, being held by a stranger who had loved her better and more completely than anyone who shared her blood. Ethan sat with her in the dark. He did not know how to give comfort. He had not been raised for it. But he stayed. He did not leave the room. And after a very long time, when the weeping had exhausted itself into something quieter, Serena lowered her hands from her face and stared at the ceiling. I heard her cry, she whispered. I told your mother. She looked me in the face and told me I imagined it.
I know.
Can I see her tomorrow? Yes. Who has her? A pause. A woman, he said quietly, who saved her life. Serena closed her eyes. And somewhere across the city, a phone was about to ring. The phone buzzed on the dresser. Unknown number. The screen lighting up in the dark.
Twice.
Zara stared at it from across the room. She crossed to it. She picked it up. She answered. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of a bad connection, but the deliberate silence of someone who wanted the person on the other end to speak first, to give something away before a single word was exchanged. Zara said nothing. She waited. Is this the woman who found the baby? The voice was unhurried. Flat. Affectless. The specific precision of someone who had removed all warmth from their voice as a professional choice. Something moved down her spine that was not cold air. Who is this? She asked. Someone who has been looking for that child for 3 weeks, the voice said. Someone who is very interested in the fact that she is still alive. Zara's hand tightened on the phone.
What do you want?
I want you to understand something clearly. A pause, deliberate, measured, the pause of a man who uses silence the way other men use threats. The child you are holding is not yours. She was never yours. And the people she belongs to, the people who are coming for her, are not people you want to be standing in front of when they arrive.
She belongs to no one who put her in a trash bin, Zara said.
A longer silence this time. You are either very brave, the voice said, or you do not yet understand what you are in the middle of. Tell me what I am in the middle of.
No.
I think it is better that you find out yourself. It will be more convincing that way. The call ended. 43 seconds. Zara stood holding the phone in both hands in the dark. The city outside the window moved and breathed and went about its business with complete indifference. Behind her, the baby slept, making the small trusting sounds of someone who does not yet know that trust can be a dangerous thing. And Zara stood in the dark with a threat circling and a baby she was not going to put down and a courage that had not yet been tested at its full limit. But here is what you do not yet know. What Ethan Cole had not yet been told. What was building quietly, patiently, in the dark the way the most dangerous things always build. Margaret Cole had not acted from panic. She had not been surprised by the pregnancy. She had not made a sudden, desperate decision in a bedroom at midnight. She had been building toward that night for 18 months. The accusation against Serena that had made Ethan doubt her, the carefully packaged information about a hotel lobby and a rival organization, the 2 words, twice, she was seen, that had poisoned his trust in his own wife and planted the seed of everything that followed. That information had not found its way to him by accident. It had been fed deliberately, carefully, with the long patience of someone who thinks not in days or weeks but in seasons, who plants something in winter and waits, without anxiety, for it to bloom into exactly the destruction they designed it for. The person who had constructed that exchange, who had identified the vulnerability, cultivated it, and deployed it with surgical precision at exactly the right moment, was the same person who had sat across a kitchen table from a frightened pregnant woman and said, "I will handle everything." The same person who had held a newborn girl for 3 seconds in the light of a storm-battered bedroom. The same person who had wrapped that baby in a kitchen cloth and walked through the rain and used the word complications with the calm fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. Margaret Cole had not acted from desperation. She had been building toward that night for 1.5 years, because she had spent 30 years building her son into something untouchable, something that did not bend, something that did not soften. She had made him into the man he was by removing, systematically and deliberately, every soft place in him that might have made him something less. And she had looked at Serena, quiet, enduring, patient Serena, and seen something she recognized as dangerous. Not dangerous like a weapon. Dangerous like warmth. The kind that gets inside stone and, given enough time and enough love, breaks it. She had looked at the possibility of a child that Ethan would love, that Serena would love, that would build between husband and wife a bond made of something she could not control or calculate or use. And she had decided, with the cold clarity of a woman who had always chosen power over everything, that it could not be allowed. The man on the phone, the voice in the dark, was the other side of it. A man who had been watching Ethan's world for years, waiting for the fracture that would let him in. Margaret had used him as a tool. What she had not calculated was that he was also watching her, that he had traced the chain back to its origin, that he knew what she had done and why, and that a living child, Ethan's legitimate daughter, rescued and alive and documented, was the most powerful weapon available against the woman who had tried to erase her.
He did not want that baby safe.
He wanted her useful. And Zara was standing between that intention and the baby asleep behind a locked door. Ethan found out at 3 a.m, not from his mother. From a document. Financial records. Communication logs. A timeline assembled by the one person in his organization whose loyalty to him ran deeper than their loyalty to the woman who had built the organization. It arrived on his phone in a single file with no message attached. No explanation needed. He read it once. He sat completely still for a very long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring.
"I know," he said.
3 words. She said nothing. Not just the baby, he said. All of it. The 18 months. The accusation. Everything. The silence on the other end was different from all her other silences. Not composed. Not calculating. The silence of a woman who has been building a house of careful architecture for a very long time and has just heard the sound of the first wall coming down. "I was protecting you," she said finally. You were building me, he said. There is a difference. And I think you know that. He ended the call. He sat in the dark, and for the first time in 32 years, Ethan Cole, the man that other powerful men were careful around, the man who had been constructed from the ground up to feel nothing that could be used against him, allowed himself to feel the full weight of what his mother had taken from him. Not just the daughter, the wife he had turned cold on, the marriage he had poisoned with doubt that was never his doubt to begin with. 3 years of distance that had been engineered by someone who loved him in the most dangerous possible way. The way that prioritizes the idea of a person over the actual living human being. He sat with all of it. And somewhere across the city, in a small room above a restaurant, Zara was also sitting in the dark. The baby was asleep against her chest, breathing in that slow, total, absolutely committed way that only sleeping babies breathe. Her tiny hand had found Zara's finger again. It was always finding Zara's finger, as though even unconscious, some part of her knew exactly where safety was and held on to it with everything she had. Zara looked at that face. This face that the world had tried to throw away. This face that had cost more than anyone would ever fully know. She looked at her and made the only decision available to her. The same decision she had made in the alley. The same decision she had made at the bin. The same decision she made every single time the world presented her with a door marked walk away. She looked at it and turned in the opposite direction. She was not letting go. Not of this baby. Not of this fight. Not of whatever was coming through the dark toward both of them. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. I still see you, she whispered. Outside, the city moved. In a building with no signage, a man was making plans. In a house on the hill, a woman who had engineered 18 months of destruction was sitting alone with the first silence she had not chosen. In the dark, a husband and a father was understanding for the first time the full shape of everything he had lost and everything he intended to reclaim. And in a small room above a restaurant, a baby girl slept, unaware that she was the center of everything. Unaware that the people who loved her and the people who wanted to use her and the people who had tried to erase her were all at this exact moment moving toward the same place. She slept. And the city hunted. And Zara held on. If this story held you from the first second to this one, if you felt Zara's hands shaking in that alley, if you felt the weight of Serena lying in the dark believing her daughter was gone, if you need to know what happens when Ethan walks back into that restaurant and finally holds his daughter for the first time, then subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the notification bell so part 2 finds you the moment it drops. Like this video. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for this story, reaching the people who need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, which character broke your heart the most? Was it Zara, who gave everything for a baby that wasn't hers? Was it Serena, who heard her daughter cry and was told she imagined it? Or was it the baby herself, who came into this world already fighting? Tell me below. I read every single one.